What's up, guys? Adam back again with the RV Returners. This time, following up our fire set review with our ice set review. So we're going to go ahead and look at the ice cards in Opus 7, see what they got. Ice has notoriously always been a very strong element for a while now. So let's go ahead and go through the cards and see if they got any better or just a bunch of duds. Let's check them out. Alright, so first up we got Emperor Final Fantasy Legends. He's a 2CP backup that when Emperor or category Final Fantasy Legends character enters your field, choose one forward of cost 5 or more opponent controls, dull it, and freeze it. I think he's just a bit too limited. Like, the fact that it has to cost 5 or more means you're not going to get a whole lot of targets, especially as like an early game backup. He's not going to be that great, I don't think. I don't expect him to see too much play. Maybe if like Final Fantasy Legends becomes like a title deck, you could see him in there. But again, like I feel like his effect is just too limited. Next up, we have Eduardo. He's a 5CP AK Job Bard. When Job Bard forward, you control attacks. Your opponent discards one card from his or her hand. Again, it's kind of limited in the fact that there's not very many Bard forwards out right now. And he is a bit overcosted for his power level. But he does count himself, so I mean, at least every time he attacks, your opponent's going to have to discard, which isn't terrible. You could set up with things like Hoshmail to do some cute plays, but I don't expect him to see too much play. I don't think he's going to be able to find a home in a lot of ice decks, really. Next is Bard. It's a 3CP standard unit backup. When it enters the field, choose 2 forwards opponent controls, freeze them. For a tap, put him in the break zone, choose 1 forward, dull and freeze. He's kind of like a Jill in the bot, like the starter Jill. He does the same exact thing on entry, but minus the burst for 1 more CP. The only nice thing over Jill is that he can tap and break without needing like an extra copy of himself in his hand. But you do have to spend 1 more CP to get him out on the board. It's nice also that you can do this during your opponent's turn. But again, I don't know if you're going to be able to find room for this card. What this card does isn't bad, but I don't know if you can warrant playing it over the starter Jill. Because I think I'd rather just have 3 of those because that's also a burst, and this is not. So it's not bad. Maybe in Pauper or something, but I don't expect to see much standard play. Next up is Chukaspel. It's a 2CP backup. Card named Galdas you control gains 1,000 power, and when Chukaspel enters the field, your opponent selects 1 forward he or she controls and dulls and freezes it. Galdas is a pretty good card, I think. So I think if you're playing Galdas and you're playing Ice, then this card makes a ton of sense. Even without Galdas, though, he's pretty decent as an early game backup, maybe to stall out a board state where maybe your opponent just went Layla Viking and you want to play this that prevents 1 point of damage from hitting you. So that could be good. You really don't care which one gets stolen frozen. You could also maybe set up scenarios where maybe they played 1 big forward, like say a Delita or something, and you can drop this. And then also in Earth Ice, this sets up pretty well for Masked Woman, which is kind of funny because his job is Masked Man. So you could play this, then they dull and freeze something, and then maybe next turn you play Masked Woman and you kill it. So I think this is a pretty solid card. Nothing crazy good, but like overall pretty solid. Next up is Gremlin. He's a 2CP monster. When your opponent discards a card from his or her hand due to your summons or abilities, he becomes a forward with 7,000 power, and when he leaves the field, when he is put from the field to the break zone, choose 1 forward, opponent controls, dull and freeze it, and it's 7k. So I think he's really good, actually. Whether or not he's great in Turbo, I'm not sure if he's too slow or not, or worth the card slot, but he's a Setzer on the way out, which is really nice for 2CP. It's pretty easy to make your opponent discard a card from their hand in Ice, so I foresee this guy is going to see a pretty decent amount of play. I expect him to be very good. Whether or not he fits in Turbo like I think he's going to, we'll have to see. But I think he's a really good card. Next up we have Black Mage. When Black Mage enters the field, if cost to pay Black Mage include the Water CP, draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card from your hand. Again, this is like this cycle of standard unit forwards where you pay an extra CP, and I think this is on the weaker end, honestly. I guess if you're playing Ice Water, but like you have Vikings and stuff, so I don't really understand why you would really need that at all. I think you would just rather play that and just not play this at all. So I don't foresee this seeing much play. Next up is another Black Mage. It's a 2CP standard unit backup for Ice and Tap. Choose a dull forward, deal it 2k. Decent, again. It's repeatable, which is nice. So you don't really have to break it to do that. But you do have to tap another backup into it, so you're kind of spending 2 CP in a way to deal a dull forward 2k. It's okay, but I don't foresee it seeing too much play. I think it's going to be hard to find slots for it in your deck. Now we have a new Kefka. It's a 5 CP AK forward. When he enters the field, if cost to play Kefka was only paid with ICP, your opponent may discard 2 cards. If he or she doesn't, freeze all forwards opponent controls. When Kefka enters the field, if the cost to play Kefka was paid with CP of exactly 3 different elements, choose 1 forward, 1 backup, and 1 monster, up to, and they'll unfreeze them. So obviously the second effect I think is better, but you have to run them in a 3-color deck. And if you're playing mono ice and you can get their hand down to the point where they can't discard the cards, they're going to be forced to freeze their forwards. It is a bit of a hefty cost at 5 though, so I'm not sure if he's going to see too much play. He might be like an interesting tech card as like a 1-of in certain decks, and he is searchable by Castellan Empire Sid, which is kind of cool, and Setzer as well. So I think he's going to be interesting. I'm kind of on the fence about him. I don't think he's great, but I think he has some potential. Next we got Goblin. It's a 2 CP ice monster. Put Goblin in the break zone, search for 1 monster card, add to your hand, and then you can discard Goblin from your hand, choose a dull forward, and deal 3,000 damage. You can only use this ability if Goblin's in your hand. I like this card a lot. I think it has a ton of potential. Just the first ability, being able to search any monster you want, is great. But it forces you kind of to play ice where a lot of monster decks weren't really playing ice. It does search out Gesper, which is a card that a lot of people have feelings over right now. So it could maybe see some potential turbo play if it's just going to be all about getting those Gespers out and kind of forcing your opponent into a long game where they're top decking. But that remains to be seen whether or not that's going to be the best turbo deck or not. Discarding to deal 3k to a dull forward is a good combo card with, say, like Sid Reigns or the new Laswell that we'll talk about in a second. As well as just some other stuff like Celis. It lets you get that extra damage in. Also, in like the Turbo Mirror, 3k could be very relevant as like killing a Thaumaturge if you have cards in hand, or killing Argath. So I like this card a lot. I think it will definitely see play, and it might be my favorite monster in the whole set. Next we got the new Shiva. It's a 3 CP EX burst. Choose 2 forwards your opponent controls, freeze them. If it resulted in a burst, dull and freeze them. So obviously off a burst this is really good, but not off a burst it's kind of average. It's basically just a Jill on a summon, which isn't super great. I think you're only going to really play this if you're playing like a full-on Shiva package deck, which could be decent with Opus 4 Shiva and Opus 3 Shiva, and then this on top of that. I don't foresee it seeing a whole lot of play, but maybe as like a 1 or 2 of in those type of decks. And then also you got the new monster that we'll talk about in a little bit that can search this as well. Then we got Jill Nabat, another one. This is her 3rd card now. She's a 4 CP backup. When she enters the field, select 1 of 2. For each job Psycom you control, your opponent discards a card from his or her hand, or deal 4k to all dull forwards opponent controls. So I like this card a lot, actually. I think this has a lot of potential to see a pretty good amount of play. She counts herself for the Psycom, so at worst she's a 4 CP backup that makes you discard a card. She can also deal 4k to all dull forwards opponent controls, which could be relevant to stack on top of other damage that's coming out. Say you play like a Sid Reigns in main 2 with this, that's going to kill something. Say you, attacked with a Celis, did 4k, now you can play this on top of it, kill something. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. And maybe she's good enough in turbo if you end up taking Edward and things out of the deck. Like if Edward and Harley come out, maybe you just replace it with this and maybe some starter Jills for some more EX bursts. I don't know. But I do like this card a lot, and I do think it will see play. Then we got an infamous card that a lot of people have been crowing crazy about, and that's the new backup Snow. He's a 4 CP backup. When a forward you control attacks, choose a forward opponent controls, dull it. I still think he's really good, but it's going to be, I think, in a limited amount of decks. So like Ice Water, I think, is the scariest thing with Vikings. Now Vikings are going to attack and dull, and I think that's well worth the 4 CP that you're spending on this guy. I think when he's scary, he's going to be extremely scary, and people will try him in a ton of decks, but then I think that you're going to end up finding that in a lot of the other tempo-heavy builds, he's not going to be as good. But, I mean, he could be good in there as well. We'll see. I think costing 4 kind of makes him a little bit fair, but he's still, in the right deck, going to be pretty insane, I think. Then next we got Sephiroth. He's a 7 CP 8K. When he enters the field, your opponent discards 2 cards from his or her hand. When he attacks, choose one forward opponent controls. If your opponent has no cards in their hand, dull and freeze. And then he has an S for S, Ice. Your opponent discards 2 cards from his or her hand. You can only use this ability during your main phase. I think this card's insane. I think this was a legend that a lot of people didn't see coming. Like, a lot of people didn't think there was going to be a Sephiroth in this set. But I think in the right build, this guy's going to be really, really good. Play this with, like, Citadel Stain and Flans and stuff. Keep your opponent's hand basically at 0. And then you're attacking and dulling and freezing something every turn. Seems pretty good for 7 CP. It's going to remain to be seen, I guess, whether or not he's going to take Orphan's spot in a lot of these decks. Because he's kind of pretty high costed. But theoretically, you can easily play him in S in the same turn. So I'm definitely going to be trying him a lot. I think he's going to see a pretty good amount of play. And I think you might see him at Worlds. We'll see, though. Next up is the other legendary. It's Sarah. She's a 4 CP 8K. When she enters the field, choose as many characters as Category 13 characters you control. Dull them. Dull 2 active Category 13 characters. Choose one forward and freeze. So I think she's pretty good in the right deck. You obviously have to build more around her because she needs some 13 characters, but it's not like those are hard to come by. And it's characters, so you're going to count your monsters as well. So I like this card, but I do think it's going to take a lot of work to find the right deck for her. I don't think you just kind of throw her in a deck and she works. So I'm interested to see what people come up with. I think she's okay. Like, I think she'll see some play, but I don't expect a lot of competitive play out of her just yet. Then we got the backup Terra. She's a 3 CP ice backup. When you cast a summon, choose one forward opponent controls, dull it. I don't think she's that great, actually. I think a lot of people are overrating her. She can be searched out with Setzer, which is nice, as another backup 6 target for him, if you're running that card. A lot of stuff that Ice wants to cast on Dull required them to be Dull in the first place, so it's really only going to stack on your extra Dull effects to let you Dull an extra, which is kind of nice. I think she's going to shine more so in Ice X decks where you're going to cast a summon and Dull something, like maybe like a fire summon where you're going to kill something and Dull something. That could be okay. But I don't foresee her seeing a ton of play. I think people will try her and then realize she's not super great, but I'm interested to see what people come up with. Next we got Time Mage. It's a 3 CP 5K. When he enters the field, choose a forward opponent controls, dull and freeze. Basically a cheaper Genesis, like slightly cheaper with less power. It's okay. Maybe in Turbo, because he costs 3, it might be kind of relevant. That because Genesis requires you to pitch 2 cards from hand more often than not, whereas this guy can be played on 1 backup pretty easily. So I could maybe see him seeing some play in Turbo, but I think you might still want the Genesis because he has that lasting effect and his power level is higher. So I think because Genesis exists, this card's not great. It is a standard unit, which means you can do some pretty tricky stuff with it. But I don't foresee it seeing a ton of play, but it is something to look out for. Next we got Blizz. It's a 2 CP 4K. It's a monster in all situations, and when it's put from the field in the break zone, search for 1 card named Shiva and add it to your hand. I think this is the best of this rotation of WAF monsters. Shiva is obviously really strong, and I think you're definitely going to see this card in Turbo, because if it dies, then it's going to go get an Opus 3 Shiva, it's going to dull 2 things, and it's going to allow them to swing for game more often than not, and that's kind of scary. Also, you have Mateus, so you don't really care about your power level if you're cheap guys that are getting you more value. So, yeah, I think this card's going to be really, really strong. I think you're going to see it a lot, even in builds outside of Turbo, because I think you're going to see a lot of Shivas in general. Then we got Mystic Knight. It's a 3 CP 6K. When it enters the field, choose up to 2 backups. If the cost paid to play Mystic Knight included win CP, activate them. The cost required to cast Ice Summons is reduced by 1. Cannot become 0. I think she's okay. I'm interested to see if people come up with something to maybe abuse the last ability, maybe like Ice Water with this in Rare Una. Maybe you even play the other Mystic Knight and you could technically reduce something by 3. But I don't really foresee that coming into play very much. I don't think it's going to see much play at all. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I don't think it's that great. Then we got Unaleska. She's a 3 CP 7K. When she enters the field or attacks, choose 1 forward. You may discard a summon from your hand. If you do, dull and freeze. Again, she's okay. I could maybe see her as a one of in certain decks if you're running like a high summon count, maybe like that Shiva deck that we're talking about. Or now, if you don't want to hard cast the Shiva, you can just play this, discard it, and then you're able to dull and freeze, and then as she attacks, you can keep discarding as long as you have the cards in your hand. Maybe you can play the old Ice Summoner that lets you get Ice Summons back to your hand and then gives you more gas for Unalesca. I don't expect her to see a ton of play, but I could see her as a one of and maybe some tempo lists or something. Then we got Yule. She's a 2 CP Ice backup. For Ice and tap, put her in the break zone, search for 1 forward, put it under the top card of your deck. You can do some interesting combo stuff with this. You're basically going to be able to draw that forward the next turn. The question's going to be, is it worth running her in your deck to be able to do that? Maybe there's going to be some kind of cool combo deck that comes out of this set that involves her. Maybe you put something second from the top and you're able to draw a card, then you can set something up that way. But we'll see. I'm interested to see something like that. I do like combo decks like that, but I think she might just be a little too limited. She can search for any forward, though, so I mean, it's going to probably be Ice X or something like that where she can get abused. But I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. It's going to be something you're probably going to see later in the set. Then we got Laswell. He's a 2 CP Ice forward, 4K. When he enters the field, choose 1 dull forward, deal it 5,000 damage. If you control 5 or more Ice characters, deal it 7,000 instead. I think this guy's good as well. Kind of goes in tandem with Citarains. I think you want to play both. I think I still prefer Citarains over this guy, but I like this guy as well, and 7K is a very relevant number to hit. And it wasn't hard for Orphan to hit that number, so it's not going to be hard for Laswell to hit that number. So I think this guy's going to see a fair amount of play. Maybe Fire Ice makes the comeback. You see this guy and Citarains in that deck as well. That could be really good. First of the starter cards we got is Ultimecia. She's a 6 CP 7K. When she enters the field, select 1 of 3. If you've received 6 points of damage, select 2 of 3. Choose 2 characters opponent controls. Dull, freeze all forwards opponent controls, and freeze all backups of opponent controls. I like her. I think people are going to try to make her work. I'm just worried that her cost might hinder her from seeing play. 6 is a lot. However, in Lightning, you can use the Adia backup to play her off just breaking a backup, which is nice. Her effects are all very nice. If you're on 6 damage, obviously this card's insane. But how many are you really going to run? Probably realistically. I like her. I think she's going to see play. But I think that 6 CP might be too much in the end. But we'll see. Then the last card we got is Emperor. He's a 2 CP backup, EX Burst. When he enters the field, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If you receive 4 points of damage or more, dull and freeze. And then for 1 ice tap, discard 2 cards, choose 1 dull forward, break it. You can only use this ability during your turn. I think this card's pretty good. He costs 2, so he can't be bad. He has the EX Burst, which makes him even better. It is limited on 4 damage, but it's not like that's going to be that hard to do most games. And just the fact that he has a reusable ability and he can get cards out of your hand that otherwise wouldn't be able to be discarded to do something could be good. I think he's going to be better outside of Mono Ice, maybe in like Ice X decks. Maybe in a deck where you're running a fair amount of darker light cards. But we'll see. I think he's pretty good, though. So I think you'll definitely see some of them. And yeah, that's it for the ice cards. So I think they got a fair amount of stuff that's pretty good. I think the new Sephiroth is insane, and you're going to see him a lot. With that, the next set review is going to be Wind, so please look forward to that. See you guys later. Peace.